Happy Sunday, everybody. I hope everybody got some sleep. We had spring forward and USL kickoff, and I'm someone who typically goes to bed around 10 p.m. And yesterday, I guess I got to bed at the equivalent of 2 a.m. if you include the spring forward, thanks to the Las Vegas Lights Tampa Bay Rowdies match, which we have a full write-up about it Beyond the 90, and we'll have some more thoughts about this week on the Florida Soccer Report podcast, and obviously on the Third Half podcast. And that came after spending several hours at the Miami FC Detroit City match while trying to keep an eye on Fort Lauderdale United and Tampa Bay Sun in the USL Super League. So just a crazy day. I'm recovering, but wanted to make a video. I actually wanted to do this yesterday, but was consumed with USL stuff about this White House task force that Donald Trump has launched around the FIFA World Cup in 2026. Now, I had said for 3 years on with Beyond the 90 that we didn't want to get political, even though I come from a political background, although I'm more of a kind of a disenchanted, jaded person now about politics, like any kind of grizzled political veteran, than I am a partisan or an ideological warrior. So I can see these things somewhat clearly. And I'm bothered by this task force. I really am, because first off, we're not supposed to have government involvement in the sport, and FIFA has always frowned upon this. But it is FIFA under Gianni Infantino who has courted Donald Trump. That Infantino was at the inauguration. Infantino was apparently I don't watch American football, so I didn't watch the Super Bowl, but was apparently I don't watch American professional football. I do watch college football. Infantino was at the White House. Was at the Super Bowl, apparently in the same suite as President Trump, and then was, of course, at the White House on Friday with this launching of a task force. Now, previously, when governments were involved in football or soccer, it was completely frowned upon by FIFA, and rightly so, in my opinion, because governments getting involved in sport remind me of the Soviet Union. They remind me of North Korea. They remind me of the People's Republic of China. They remind me of Nazi Germany, right? It's all these totalitarian regimes that do that. And I was just appalled by Infantino saying that having some sort of conflict between the U.S. and Canada and Mexico, with them hosting. I've been more focused on the Canadian aspect of that personally, but Mexico as well. There's some conflict there. Is a good thing to add spice into this World Cup. And Trump said something very similar as the three countries prepare to co-host. And again, we didn't want to turn this site into a commentary on politics, although now it feels inevitable because football and politics are always intertwined in some aspect, as I've been reminded countless times by journalists that I've worked with in Britain and in Germany and France, right? In those three countries in particular, that you cannot separate the politics from this sport like you can from other sports. And was even told deridingly by a German friend of mine when I told him I was not going to have politics involved in Beyond the 90 when I launched it. He said, good luck with that. You'll have to back off of that at some point. And he was right. But and we went into kind of the political space with the Canada thing, right? And how the U.S.-Canada conflict is going to cause problems in the football community, which Jesse Marsh, who is American but is now coaching the Canadian men's national team, had to address head on. Had to address the subject of Donald Trump head on in the press conferences in advance of the CONCACAF Nations League semifinals later this month. So this White House task force bothers me because there's going to be an executive director who will be paid that will be working out of the White House under the direction of the president and overtly political and governmental officials. And this just continues kind of the slide in the United States where we expect governments to hand over billions of dollars, or millions and hundreds of millions of dollars to billionaire sports franchise owners so that they can build a new stadium. And we say it's in the public good, right? This is part of the continued process where we allow sporting events to become overtly political in a way that they really aren't in Europe. They really aren't in other in major industrialized nations. Okay, I know they are in Latin America and in parts of Asia and Africa, but they're not. I don't like comparing the United States with what goes on in Cambodia or in Angola, right? I like comparing the United States with what goes on in Japan, in Germany, in the United Kingdom, in France, in those sorts of countries, South Korea, Australia, Canada. And this task force really bothers me because now you are going to have the White House with their finger on the thumb. And in fact, in the announcement, they didn't mention the U.S. as co-hosting the World Cup with Canada and Mexico, because why would they at this point? And whether it's Trump or whether it's I don't know, Bill Clinton, some Democratic president, I don't like this. I am not necessarily been even thrilled when I've seen. I think George W. Bush handled it well, right? He made a phone call to the men's national team on the outset of the first match against the Czech Republic in the 2006 FIFA World Cup in Germany. I think that's the way you handle it. You don't show up at matches necessarily. You don't start using governmental entities to promote sporting events or national teams, right? These need to be fully independent. And I think we're now on a slippery slope where the White House and the president, this president, and then the next president, if the next president's a Democrat, they may follow the same playbook. Think we can interfere in sporting events. We can dictate what goes on in sporting events under the guise that we're preparing the country for it. We can sort of misrepresent it to mirror the current political agenda or ideological agenda of the day. In this case, that's not acknowledging that Canada and Mexico are co-hosting. And look, I think I'll address this in the future, but I'm hearing from I'm always in contact with people in Europe in particular about this sport, and I'm hearing from people that they're really not that keen on coming to the United States next year the way they were. And going to Qatar, and going to Brazil, although the Russia World Cup was another kind of like iffy one. It feels a lot like that, actually. But they're willing to go to Canada and Mexico. So that might change. That attitude might change. And that is not entirely about Trump, by the way. That's about other aspects of American culture and safety and what's happening in cities. And I know in a lot of cases, those cities or those urban areas are governed by Democrats. And the lack of mass transit, right? How can you have major sporting events with a lack of mass transit? And I was doing press ops last year for the Cricket World Cup, the T20 Cricket World Cup. By the way, congratulations to India. They just won the ICC Champions Cup today, and I know politically that will be exploited there. That's the sort of thing that goes on in India, right? Should not go on in the United States. Although I wasn't thrilled with Justin Trudeau during the four nations, but I think that was kind of a reaction to the U.S. So, but that I think he stepped over the line too with that. But my point is, a lot of these Europeans are saying, well, part of the reason we don't want to come to the United States is because there's bad mass transit. The cities are unsafe. The cities aren't particularly clean compared to most European cities, which, yeah, I would, you can argue that depends on the specific city. So that's not Trump related. I think the Trump and the politicization and the things that have gone on in the last 6 weeks, culminating with the change in American policy towards Ukraine and Russia, have just furthered that notion from some of these people. But there are many, many issues at play. Now, if the White House task force can work with local government authorities to improve mass transit, to improve what goes on around the World Cup matches in the United States, maybe that's a good thing. But as I said, during the cricket T20 World Cup, I had this experience dealing with foreign journalists where they were all complaining about the transit in American cities. And this was not what they were used to in cricket tournaments, which tended to be held in Australia or New Zealand or the UK or India. India didn't have very good mass transit until recently, but now they're killing it with that, right? I mean, their cities now are very, very functional, whereas 20 years ago when I would go to India, I would quite frankly look down upon the place. Now I'm kind of saying, oh, wow, wish we had some of this. in American cities. So those journalists who cover cricket were used to that. Or are now used to that. The journalists who cover football are even more used to that. They're used to be able to getting around cities. They're used to being able to, maybe the off days between matches when they're not covering matches, doing things without having to pay $100 for an Uber, or if they can reserve an Uber at all, right? So, yeah, these are all issues, and we'll continue to monitor this. But I wanted to register my critique of this White House task force and its potential danger, in my opinion, at this point.